Elizabeth Carter did not cry when they threw her into the dirt. She did not cry when the man she had served for 8 months stood over her in the street and called her a thief in front of everyone who had ever known her name. She did not cry when they tossed her bag out after her, and the coins she had earned scattered across the ground like she was worth nothing more than loose change. She only cried when 2 small children she had never seen before ran toward her, dropped to their knees in the dust, and wrapped their arms around her neck. "Please," one of them whispered, "please be our mama." Before the story begins, if this kind of tale moves something in you, hits something real, something you have carried a long time, go ahead and subscribe to this channel right now. Leave a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now let us begin. The morning they publicly destroyed Elizabeth Carter's reputation in the town of Harlan Creek, Montana, the temperature was already climbing past 90 degrees before 9 o'clock. She had known the moment was coming. She had felt it the way animals feel a storm, not in their mind, but somewhere deeper in the place where instinct lives and reason has no say. For 3 days, she had watched Cornelius Holt moving differently around the ranch house. Quieter, more careful. The way a man moves when he has already decided something and is only waiting for the right audience. She should have left the night before. She had packed her bag. She had sat on the edge of the narrow bed in the room off the kitchen and held that worn cloth bag in her lap and told herself to stand up, told herself to walk out the back door before the sun came up, told herself that a woman with her history could not afford to wait for other people to make decisions about her life. But she had nowhere to go, and that was the truth that kept her sitting there until morning came and the decision was made for her. Cornelius Holt had built his fortune on appearances. He was not the richest man in Harlan Creek, but he was the most careful about making sure everyone believed he was. He owned the largest private ranch in the county. He employed 12 men and kept 3 houseworkers. He sat in the front pew at church every Sunday and tipped his hat to the women and shook hands with the men and smiled the smile of a man who understood exactly how much a smile was worth. Elizabeth had worked for him for 8 months. She had cooked 3 meals a day for his workers. She had scrubbed the floors and washed the linens and mended the curtains and repaired every broken thing in that house with her own hands. She had done it without complaint because that was the arrangement and she was a woman who honored arrangements. What she had not known was that Cornelius Holt was not a man who did the same. He called her out in the middle of the main street of Harlan Creek on a Thursday morning in July. He had timed it well. The market was open. The post office had just unlocked its doors. There were at least 30 people within hearing distance, and he spoke loudly enough to make certain every single one of them heard. "This woman," he announced, gesturing to Elizabeth with the kind of calm authority that comes from knowing you will never be questioned, "has been helping herself to my household funds. Small amounts, over several months. Enough that I cannot overlook it any longer." Elizabeth stood in the dirt street and felt the ground tilt under her. "That is not true," she said. Her voice was steady. She had learned a long time ago how to keep her voice steady, even when her hands were shaking. "I kept records," she said. "Every penny that came in and went out of that household, I wrote it down. I can show—" "I have my own records," Cornelius said pleasantly. He did not raise his voice. He never needed to. "And mine tell a different story." She looked at the people around her. She looked at their faces, searching for someone who might speak. Someone who might say they knew her. Someone who might offer the smallest acknowledgement that she had lived among them for 8 months and conducted herself honestly. No one said a word. A woman near the general store turned away and found something urgent to look at in the other direction. 2 men near the post office exchanged a glance and stepped back slightly, as if proximity to her accusation might transfer like a disease. "Your wages have been withheld to offset the missing funds," Cornelius continued. "You are no longer employed at my property, and I would ask that you remove yourself from this town before you cause any further difficulty." "You owe me 8 months of wages," Elizabeth said. "I owe you nothing." He said it the way men like him say things they have rehearsed, calmly, finally, as though the matter were already behind him before it had finished happening, and then he turned and walked away. Elizabeth stood there in the July heat, while the street around her quietly resumed its business. She watched people who had nodded to her in the market, who had accepted her presence in their community without objection for the better part of a year, simply drift back into their routines. One or two of them looked at her with expressions that might have been sympathy, if sympathy required nothing of the person feeling it. No one came to stand beside her. She picked up her bag. She started walking. She did not know where she was going. The nearest town of any real size was 2 days on foot in the heat, and she had almost nothing in that bag except a change of clothes, a small Bible with a cracked spine, and enough dry bread to last her through the day if she was careful about it. She was 31 years old, and she had absolutely nothing. She had not always been in this position. There had been a time not so long ago that she couldn't still feel it, when she had believed that honest work and careful living would build something real. She had believed that a woman who gave her best would eventually be treated with fairness. She had believed in the particular stubborn way of people who have been hurt before and have chosen not to let it make them cruel that the world would eventually balance out. The world had not balanced out. She walked the dirt road out of Harlan Creek with the sun pressing down on the back of her neck and the bag growing heavier with every mile, and she made herself a single promise. She would not cry. Not here. Not where any of them could see her. She had given that town 8 months of herself. She would not give it her tears on top of everything else. The road stretched ahead of her through flat, dry country, and she focused on the movement of her own feet and tried to stop thinking about what came next. The problem was that what came next was unknowable. She had no family to send word to. She had no savings. She had no name in any other town that might count for something. What she had was a road and 2 feet and whatever was left of the will that had carried her this far. She had been walking for maybe 40 minutes when she heard the wagon. She heard it before she saw it, the creak of wheels and the steady knock of horse hooves on packed earth, and she moved to the edge of the road without looking back. She had learned that the most dignified thing a person without options could do was take up as little space as possible and keep moving. But the wagon did not pass her. It slowed. She heard it slow, and she kept walking, staring straight ahead, because she was not going to turn around and look at whoever it was and let them see her face. "Ma'am?" The voice was low, not unkind, not particularly warm either, just a voice that said the word like a man who said ma'am because that was what you said, not because he was performing politeness. Elizabeth stopped walking. She stood still for a moment, and then she turned around. The wagon was a working wagon, the kind used for ranch supply runs, weathered wood. Nothing decorative about it, pulled by 2 solid horses that looked like they had been working hard and knew how to do it. The man holding the reins was somewhere in his mid-30s. Dark hair jaw that carried several days of stubble, a hat pulled low against the sun. He was not looking at her with pity. He was looking at her the way a man looks at a situation he is trying to understand before he makes any decisions about it. What caught her breath was the 2 children beside him. Twins. A boy and a girl. Both of them, somewhere around 6 years old. Both sitting pressed together on the seat beside their father with the particular stillness of children who have learned that the world can change very fast and it pays to be ready. They were staring at her, not the way children usually stared at strangers with curiosity or suspicion or the bored attention of small people with nothing else to look at. They were staring at her with an expression she had no name for, something that looked almost like recognition, except that was impossible because she had never seen either of them before in her life. "You heading into Harlan Creek?" the man asked. "I am heading away from it," Elizabeth said. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a reaction. More like a piece of information settling into place. "You Carter woman?" he asked. "The one Holt let go this morning." The words were a small blow even now. She kept her face steady. "I am," she said. He was quiet for a moment. The girl child, the one on the right, reached out and grabbed her brother's hand without looking at him. The automatic gesture of a child seeking something solid. "Where are you headed?" the man asked. "I have not decided yet," Elizabeth said, which was honest. Away was a direction, not a destination. He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he looked at the road ahead of them, and something moved across his face, that she couldn't read, a calculation or a decision, or maybe something that had been sitting unresolved for a long time and had just found an unexpected answer. "I am William Dawson," he said. "I run the Dawson Ranch about 6 miles east. These are my children, Samuel." He tilted his head toward the boy. "And Clara." Elizabeth looked at the children. Clara was watching her with those serious eyes. Samuel had his free hand pressed flat against the seat beside him, the way a child holds still when they are trying very hard not to do the thing they want to do. "I lost my wife 3 years ago," William said. It was not offered as a confession or a bid for sympathy. He said it the way he might state any fact about his situation clearly, without ornamentation. "I have been managing the children without help since then. It has not been easy." "I am sorry," Elizabeth said. "I am not looking for sorry," he said. "Not unkindly. I am looking for someone who can stay with my children while I am away on a cattle drive. I have got a run coming up in 3 weeks. I'll be gone the better part of a month. I need someone in that house who can be trusted." Elizabeth looked at him. "You do not know me," she said. "No," he agreed. "But I know Cornelius Holt, have known him most of my life." A pause. "I did not say I believed what he said about you." Something shifted in her chest. She was careful not to let it show. "What I am offering," William said, "is a room 3 meals a day, fair wages paid at the end of each week, and honest work. You would care for the children, manage the household. Nothing more than what it sounds like." She looked at the road ahead of her. She looked at the empty heat of it. She looked at the 2 children sitting on that wagon seat. Then she looked at Clara. Clara was still watching her. And now the girl reached up with her free hand, the one not holding her brother's, and stretched it out just slightly toward Elizabeth. Not far enough to be a grab. Just enough to close a little of the space between them, the way children do when they want something and have not yet decided if they are going to ask for it. Elizabeth looked at that small reaching hand, and she felt something crack open in the center of her chest, clean as ice breaking in spring. "All right," she said. She said it before she had finished thinking about it. She said it before she had weighed the risks, or considered the complications, or thought about what it would mean to walk into a stranger's home when she had just been publicly accused of stealing from the last stranger's home she had been trusted with. She said it because that small hand reaching toward her was the most honest thing she had seen all day. William Dawson nodded once. He reached down and extended his hand to help her up, and Elizabeth took it and climbed up onto the bench, and there was a brief scramble as both children shifted to make room and somehow ended up with Elizabeth between them, which was not what anyone had planned, but which no one moved to change. Samuel sat on her left bolt upright, staring straight ahead, trying very hard to look like he had not maneuvered himself into that position on purpose. Clara leaned against her arm. Just slightly. Just the smallest lean, barely more than proximity. But she leaned, and Elizabeth felt it, and she looked straight ahead at the road and said nothing and let the child lean. William clicked the horses forward. They rode in silence for the better part of a mile, the wagon creaking over the dry earth, the sun high and relentless overhead. Then Clara said very quietly, not quite to anyone in particular, "She smells like the lady at church." Samuel said with great 6-year-old authority, "That is soap, Clara." "I know it is soap," Clara said. "I like it." William did not look at Elizabeth. Elizabeth did not look at William. But she heard something in his silence that she suspected was the sound of a man trying not to let his children see him feel whatever it was he was feeling. The ranch was 6 miles east, as he had said, long enough that the sun had shifted by the time the wagon rolled through the gate. Long enough that Clara had fallen asleep against Elizabeth's arm with the complete and trusting surrender of a small child. Long enough that Samuel, who had spent the entire ride determined not to be the kind of boy who fell asleep against strangers, was fighting his eyes with everything he had and losing. The moment the wagon stopped, he snapped awake and sat straight. "I was not sleeping," he announced. "I know," Elizabeth said. "I was resting my eyes." "That is what I said." He looked at her sideways, trying to determine whether she was being sincere or kind. After a moment, he apparently decided it did not matter, and climbed carefully down from the wagon. William lifted Clara, who woke just enough to wrap her arms around his neck, and then went right back to wherever she had been. He carried her inside, and Elizabeth followed with her bag, and that was how she walked through the door of a house that was not hers. She noticed things quickly, the way a woman who has kept other people's houses notices things. The kitchen was clean, but functional, with none of the small touches that make a kitchen feel like a place where anyone actually lives. No herbs hanging to dry, no cloth over the bread, no color anywhere that wasn't strictly necessary. The front room had a good stone fireplace and solid furniture, well made but unadorned. There were no curtains that anyone had chosen with care. There was a photograph above the mantel of a young woman with light hair and a serious expression, and eyes that looked like Clara's. Elizabeth did not look at it for long. She looked at the dust on the windowsills. She looked at the worn-out hem on the curtain by the door. She looked at the small sock on the floor by the fireplace that had clearly been there for several days. She looked at all the evidence of a home that was holding together through effort alone, held up by the stubborn will of a man who was doing his best, and was not quite enough in all the places that required something other than effort. William came back without Clara. "She will sleep a while," he said. "The drive wore them out." He looked at Elizabeth standing in his front room with her bag still in her hand. "Your room is off the kitchen," he said. "Small but private. I put clean linen on it this morning." She blinked. "This morning," she said. He looked at her steadily. "I heard what happened in town. Word travels. I was coming to see if—" He stopped. "There are people in this territory who deserve help when they need it. I believe you are one of them. That is all." Elizabeth looked at him. She had been lied to, manipulated, and publicly humiliated in the same day. Her ability to trust a stranger's stated intentions was not at its best, but there was nothing in his face that looked like performance. No practiced warmth, no careful charm. He was a man who was uncomfortable having this conversation, and was having it anyway because he had decided it was the right thing to do. "The room will suit me fine," she said. "Thank you, Mr. Dawson." "William," he said. "No need for formality out here." She nodded. He nodded. There was a pause where neither of them had anything else to say, and neither of them moved, and then Samuel appeared in the doorway to the kitchen with a piece of cornbread in his hand, and crumbs already on his shirt. "Are you staying?" he asked. Elizabeth looked down at him. "I am," she said. Samuel considered this. Then he held out the cornbread. Half of it anyway. "It is from yesterday," he said, "but it is still good." Elizabeth took the half piece of cornbread. "Thank you, Samuel," she said. He nodded, serious and satisfied, and disappeared back into the kitchen. William watched after him for a moment. Then he looked at Elizabeth, and something in his expression shifted. Not quite a smile, not quite grief, but something that moved between them briefly, and was gone before she could name it. "Supper is usually around 6, he said. "I will have it ready," she said. He nodded and went back outside, and Elizabeth stood alone in the front room of William Dawson's house, with half a piece of yesterday's cornbread in her hand, and the photograph of a woman she would never meet, looking down at her from above the mantel. She looked back at it for a moment. "I am not here to take anything that belonged to you," she said quietly. "I only need somewhere to land." She did not know if she believed in such things, but it felt like the right thing to say. She picked up her bag and went to find the room off the kitchen, and she set her things down, and she straightened her back, and she went to work. That was the first evening. By the end of the first week, Elizabeth had learned that Samuel was afraid of thunderstorms, but would sooner suffer through one than admit it, and that Clara had nightmares twice a week like clockwork, and would not be consoled unless someone sat with her until she fell back to sleep. She had learned that William Dawson ate whatever she put in front of him without complaint, and said thank you every single time, which was more than most men did. She had learned that the ranch hands, 4 of them, were respectful at meals, and gave her a wide berth otherwise, which was exactly what she preferred. She had also learned that this house had not had a woman's steady presence in it for 3 years, and the absence had left marks in every corner of it. Not in the obvious ways, not in neglect or disorder, but in a kind of emotional thinning like cloth that is still intact, but has been washed so many times that the light comes through it. She began to fix the things she could fix. She repaired the hem on the kitchen curtain. She found seeds in a tin on a high shelf and planted them in a small patch of ground near the back door. She moved the photograph of William's wife from above the mantel to the small table near the stairs where it could be seen, but did not have to be the first thing your eyes landed on every time you came into the room. William did not comment on the photograph, but she noticed him pause at the foot of the stairs one evening and look at it for a long time, and she thought she was not certain, but she thought that something in his shoulders was less rigid than usual. Clara stopped having nightmares. Not all at once. The first week she had 2, and Elizabeth sat with her through both of them. The second week she had 1. The third week, none. Samuel finished reading his first full book by the end of the second week. He brought it to Elizabeth at the kitchen table with a solemnity that made her want to put her arms around him and also made her understand perfectly that he would die before he allowed it. "I read the whole thing," he said. "You did," she said. "Even the hard parts." "Especially those," she said. He set the book down on the table and stood there for a moment, not leaving. "Will you find me another one?" he said. "I will," she said. He nodded and walked away, and came back 2 minutes later for no apparent reason, and stood in the kitchen eating an apple and watching her cook, and she said nothing about it, because she understood that this was his way, and she was not going to ruin it by making it into something. William watched all of this. He did not say much about it. He was not a man who said much about anything unless saying it was strictly necessary. But he watched the way a careful man watches things that matter to him, and Elizabeth was aware of being watched without being made uncomfortable by it, which was unusual in her experience. He was a fair man. She had known unfair men. She knew what they felt like in a room. She knew the particular weight of their presence, and the way the air changed when they were displeased, and the specific texture of a compliment from a man who was calculating what it would get him. William Dawson was none of these things. He was simply a man who was doing his best in difficult circumstances and who had the decency to recognize when someone else was doing the same. That was more than she had been given in a long time. She did not let herself lean into it too much. She did not let herself forget that she was an employee, that this was a temporary arrangement, that the warm kitchen and the children's voices and the 6 miles of grass and mountain between this place and the town that had thrown her away were not protection from anything permanent. She did not let herself think about what she wanted. What she wanted was not something she could afford to think about. At the end of her 3rd week at the ranch, William told her that the cattle drive was being moved up by a few days. He would be leaving sooner than planned. They were in the kitchen after supper. The children had gone to bed. The lamp was burning low. It was the first time she had been truly alone in a room with him, and she noticed that he sat at the table with his hat in his hands, turning it around slowly, the way men do when they are working up to saying something they are not sure how to say. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Ask," she said. He looked at the hat in his hands. Then he looked up at her. "When I am gone," he said, "who is watching out for you?" She had not expected that. Of all the things he might have said clarifying the terms of her employment, leaving instructions for the ranch telling her he had spoken to someone about what Cornelius Holt had done, she had not expected that. "I beg your pardon," she said. "You are alone out here," he said. "The ranch hands are good men, but you do not know them, and they do not know you, and there is no one else. Holt is the kind of man who does not let things settle when he believes he has won something. I want to know you will be all right." Elizabeth looked at him for a long moment. "I have been looking out for myself for a long time," she said. "I will manage." "I know you will," he said. "That is not what I asked." She was quiet. He held her gaze. "I will be all right," she said finally. "The children need me here. That is enough." William looked at her for a moment, as though he were trying to see past what she had said to what she meant. Then he nodded. "The children need you here," he agreed. "And that is not the only reason I am glad you are." He stood, set his hat on his head, and said good night, and walked out of the kitchen. Elizabeth sat at the table for a long time after that. She told herself it meant nothing. She told herself it was the observation of a practical man who valued the stability she had brought to his household. She told herself all the sensible things. And then she picked up the lamp and went to check on the children, and she stood in the doorway of the room where Samuel and Clara slept side by side, their faces slack and unguarded, in the way of children who still believe the night is safe, and she felt something she had not let herself feel in a very long time. She felt like somewhere was home. She was still afraid, but she let herself stand there a little longer than she needed to, because whatever came next, whatever William Dawson meant, or did not mean, whatever Cornelius Holt was planning, whatever the world beyond those 6 miles had in store for her right now, in this moment, 2 children were sleeping safely, and a man had asked who was watching out for her. And that was more than nothing. That was in fact more than she had been given in longer than she could remember. She went to bed. She did not sleep for a very long time. But for the first time in 3 weeks, when she finally did, she did not dream about the dirt street in Harlan Creek. She dreamed about seeds pushing up through dark soil toward a sky full of light. William Dawson left on a Tuesday. He did not make a ceremony of it. He was up before dawn, moving through the house with the quiet efficiency of a man who had done this before and had learned that drawn-out goodbyes only made the leaving harder. Elizabeth heard him in the kitchen while it was still dark, and she got up and put the coffee on without being asked, because that was the kind of thing she did now, without thinking about it. He came into the kitchen and stopped when he saw the coffee already waiting. He looked at the cup. Then he looked at her. "You did not have to do that," he said. "I was awake," she said. He sat down and drank it, standing up the way men do when they have somewhere to be and are trying not to waste a moment of the warmth. She packed him food for the road without being asked for, that either hard biscuits, dried meat, 2 apples, and set it on the table beside him. And he looked at it, and then looked at her again, with that expression she had started to recognize, the one that said something he was not going to say out loud. "The children know I am going," he said. "We talked last night. They will be upset this morning, but they have done this before. Samuel will pretend he is fine. He will not be fine. Give him something to do with his hands." "I know," Elizabeth said. "Clara will cry." "I know that too." He nodded. He finished the coffee. He picked up the food she had packed and put it in his saddlebag without comment. And then he stood in the doorway for a moment with his hat in his hand and looked back at her. "I will be back in 4 weeks," he said. "Maybe 5. "We will be here," she said. Something crossed his face that she did not look at long enough to name. "Elizabeth," he said. She looked at him. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Thank you for being someone they can trust." He put his hat on and walked out. She listened to the sound of his horse moving away from the house, the slow, steady rhythm of it fading into the morning dark, and she stood at the kitchen window and watched the shape of him disappear into the pre-dawn gray. Then she turned around and started making breakfast, because the children would be awake within the hour, and life did not pause for feelings. And she had learned that the surest way to survive the absence of something you had not meant to need was to keep your hands moving. Samuel was up first, as he always was. He came into the kitchen with his hair still wild from sleep and his shirt on backward, which he had not noticed, and he sat at the table and looked at the place where his father usually sat and said nothing. "Shirt is on backward," Elizabeth said. He looked down. He pulled it off and turned it around and put it back on with the focused determination of a boy who was going to be very busy being fine today. "Is there work to do?" he said. "There is always work to do," she said. "After breakfast?" "I can work before breakfast." "You cannot," she said. "Sit down and eat." He sat down and ate very fast and pushed his plate away and said, "What kind of work?" She gave him the fence line to check along the east pasture. It was not strictly necessary, one of the ranch hands would have gotten to it, but it was a real job, an outdoor job, a job that required walking and looking and making decisions. and Samuel needed all three of those things more than he needed breakfast that morning. He was out the door in under 2 minutes. Clara came down 20 minutes later and stood in the kitchen doorway in her nightgown, looking at the empty table and the empty chair and the absence of her father like a physical object in the room. "He's gone," she said. "He is," Elizabeth said. Clara's chin did the thing it did before she cried, a small particular tremble, just the lower lip barely visible. "Come here," Elizabeth said. Clara crossed the kitchen and let Elizabeth put both arms around her, and she cried for about 3 minutes, the clean, honest crying of a child who has learned that grief does not get smaller by being hidden. Then she wiped her face on Elizabeth's apron without apology and said, "Can I help with the biscuits?" "You can," Elizabeth said. "Papa likes them with the extra butter." "I know," Elizabeth said. "We will make sure they are ready when he gets home." Clara nodded with great seriousness and climbed up onto the stool and put her hands in the dough, and Elizabeth worked beside her, and for a while the only sound in the kitchen was the steady rhythm of 2 pairs of hands doing something useful. It was such a small moment, and it mattered so much. The first week without William passed in a rush of small crises and ordinary victories. Samuel fell off the fence on Wednesday and came in with a gashed knee that he absolutely refused to admit hurt. Clara got into an argument with one of the barn cats and lost badly and had 3 parallel scratches on her arm that she displayed with enormous pride, as though she had won. Elizabeth repaired a leak in the kitchen roof with help from one of the ranch hands, a quiet older man named Hector, who handed her supplies without commentary, and seemed to consider this perfectly normal, which she appreciated. By the end of the first week she had settled into a rhythm. It was a rhythm she had not planned on, and had not asked for, and had not seen coming, and it fit her the way things only fit when they are genuinely right, and not when you are forcing them. The children moved around her like she was a fixed point. Samuel checked in with her 3 times a day, under various pretexts. He needed a tool. He had a question about something he had read. He wanted to know what was for supper, and Clara simply followed her through the house most mornings like a small determined shadow, handing her things before she asked for them, narrating whatever was happening with the complete focus of a child who has decided that this person is interesting and worth paying attention to. Elizabeth cooked and cleaned and mended and taught and planned, and every evening she sat at the kitchen table after the children went to bed and read by lamplight. And outside the grass moved in the night wind, and the house made the sounds houses make when they are settling. And she thought she could not help it. She tried not to. But she thought that this was a life she could have lived. A life that looked something like this. A life where the work was real, and the people in it were worth knowing. Then the letter came. It arrived on a Friday afternoon, brought by a rider from town, who left it with Hector at the gate and did not stay. Hector brought it to Elizabeth at the back door with the expression of a man who had no interest in being the messenger, but understood it was his job. It was addressed to William Dawson. She set it on the table and looked at it and told herself it was none of her business. She made supper. She put the children to bed. She came back to the kitchen and looked at the letter again. It was not sealed. Or rather, it had been sealed and someone had opened it and resealed it badly with the flap not fully stuck. She could see this clearly in the lamplight. The letter had been opened before it reached this house. Her hands went cold. She knew the look of a tampered letter. She had seen it before in a different life in the hands of a different man who monitored everything that came in and went out of his household, because control was how men like that felt safe. She looked at the return address on the outside. The handwriting was not familiar, but the name was. R. Holt. She sat down. The only Holt she knew was Cornelius. And Cornelius did not write letters to people he had already beaten. He did not need to. He simply moved on to the next thing and left the damage behind him. But R. Holt was not Cornelius. She sat with that knowledge for a long time, and then she made herself open the letter because she was alone in this house with 2 children and a man away on the road, and something connected to the name Holt had just arrived at their door, and she was not a woman who waited passively for bad things to happen to her anymore. The letter was short. It was written in a woman's hand, cramped and urgent, the handwriting of someone who was writing quickly and under pressure. It said, "William, I know you don't want to hear from me. I know I have no right to ask anything of you. But you need to know what Cornelius is doing. He is moving on the Carter woman. She is not safe where she is. He does not let things go, you know that better than anyone. Please, I am trying to make things right. Ruth." Elizabeth read it 3 times. Then she set it down on the table very carefully, the way you set down something that might break if you are not careful, except it was not the letter she was worried about breaking. She sat there for a long time. Cornelius Holt was not done with her. She had believed in the way that people believe things they desperately need to be true, that leaving his town would be enough. That the distance and the weeks and the quiet of this new place would be sufficient barrier. That a man who had already taken everything she had would be satisfied and move on. She had been wrong. She got up. She walked to the window. She looked out at the dark yard and the dark fields beyond it, and thought about what it meant, really meant that someone had opened this letter before it reached its destination. Cornelius had people watching the roads. He knew she was here. He had known for some time. The question was not what he wanted. She knew what he wanted. He wanted the accounting she had kept. The written records she had referenced in the street when he accused her. 8 months of careful numbers, every transaction logged in her small, neat hand. The kind of evidence that could not be dismissed as a woman's word against a powerful man's, because it was not a word, it was a document. It was columns of figures that told a story no one could rewrite. She had those records. She still had them. They were in her bag, folded inside the cover of her Bible, because she had known, some part of her had always known, that the day would come when she would need them. She had not expected to need them this soon. She went to her room and took out the Bible and unfolded the pages and sat on the edge of her bed in the lamplight and looked at 8 months of her own handwriting and thought about what came next. What came next was the question, because she could run. She was very good at running. She had been doing it in one form or another for most of her adult life. She could pack her bag tonight and be gone before dawn and leave this ranch and these children and this man she was not supposed to be thinking about, and put more distance between herself and Cornelius Holt and his surveillance and his anger and his particular brand of destruction. She could do that. She looked at the Bible in her hands. She thought about Clara's face that morning when she cried for 3 minutes and then asked about the biscuits. She thought about Samuel, who checked in with her 3 times a day under false pretexts because he needed to know she was still there. She thought about William saying, "Not the only reason I am glad you are." She folded the records back into the Bible and put it in her bag and went back to the kitchen. She was not running. She was done running, but she needed to think, and she needed to think clearly, which meant she needed to understand exactly what she was dealing with, which meant she needed to know who Ruth Holt was and what she meant by making things right. She needed to talk to someone. The only person she knew who might have answers was Hector, and she was not sure how much he knew or how much he would say, but she was going to find out. She went to bed. She slept 4 hours. She got up before dawn and started the coffee, and when Hector came in from the barn at first light, she set a cup in front of him without preamble and said, "Tell me about the Holt family." Hector wrapped both hands around the cup and looked at her. "All of them," he said. "Start with Ruth," she said. Something shifted in his face. Not surprise exactly. More like a man who has been waiting for a conversation and is deciding whether he trusts the person he needs to have it with. "You got a letter," he said. "I did." "From Ruth." "You knew it was coming," she said. He was quiet. "Hector," she said, "I have 2 children sleeping in this house, and a man on the road who does not know what is sitting on his table. I need to understand what I am dealing with." He looked at his coffee. Then he looked at her. "Ruth Holt was William's wife's sister," he said. Elizabeth went still. "Was," she said. "Is," he corrected. "She married Cornelius's cousin, different branch, but she knows Cornelius, grew up with him, knows what he does." "And she is trying to warn us," Elizabeth said. "She has been trying to warn people for years." Hector said quietly. Nobody listens. Cornelius is careful. Cornelius is always careful. Elizabeth thought about the tampered letter. About the writer who had not stayed. About the fact that the letter had been opened before it arrived, which meant someone along the road between here and wherever Ruth had sent it from had read it and decided to let it through anyway, or had been paid to let it through as a message. A reminder that nothing in this territory moved without Cornelius knowing. "What does he want from me?" she said. Specifically, Hector wrapped his hands tighter around the cup. "There is a land filing," he said, "connected to the property where you were working. Cornelius has been trying to extend his claim on the eastern boundary for 2 years. He needs the books clean to do it. The county assessor has been asking questions." Elizabeth felt the pieces click into place with the cold precision of a lock opening. "My records," she said. "Your records show where the money went," Hector said. "And it did not all go where it was supposed to." She sat back. 8 months of careful numbers. Every transaction logged. Columns of figures she had kept out of professional habit because she was a woman who kept records because she had learned that the only protection a woman without resources had was documentation. She had thought she was keeping records to prove her own innocence. She had not known she was also keeping records that could destroy a powerful man's land scheme. "He does not want me to leave," she said slowly. "He wants to find me. He wants those records." "Yes," Hector said. "And he knows I am here." Hector was quiet for one beat. "He has people. He knows a lot of things." "Does William know?" she asked. "About the land filing, about what Cornelius has been doing." Hector looked at his cup. "William knows some of it," he said carefully. "He and Cornelius have history. William's wife, her family, and the Holts were connected before it all went wrong. It is complicated." "How wrong?" Elizabeth said. Hector looked at her, and in the silence between them, she understood that he was deciding how much to tell her. Not because he did not trust her, but because some of what he knew was not his story to tell. Some of it belonged to William, and Hector was a man who understood the difference between loyalty and gossip, and held firmly to the line between them. "He will tell you himself," Hector said, "when he gets back." "And if Cornelius does not wait for him to get back?" Hector set down his cup. "Then we deal with it," he said simply. "This ranch has stood through worse." It was not a grand declaration. He said it the way he said most things, quietly, practically, without drama. But she heard something in it that steadied her more than any reassurance could have. It was the voice of a man who had been on this land a long time and intended to keep being on it. She nodded. She got up and started making breakfast. She was still afraid. But she was also clear now in a way she had not been the night before. She knew what Cornelius wanted. She knew she had it. She knew what was coming, and she was going to be ready. 2 days later, a man showed up at the ranch gate. She was in the yard with Clara when she saw him ride up alone, well-dressed for the territory. The kind of careful well-dressed that announced money without shouting about it. He stopped at the gate and looked at her with the pleasant, patient expression of someone who is absolutely certain of the outcome of a conversation before it starts. Clara stopped what she was doing and looked at him. "Who is that?" Clara said. "I do not know yet," Elizabeth said. "Go inside." "But, Clara." Her voice was quiet, steady, the voice she used when she needed the children to listen without argument. "Go inside and stay with Hector, right now." Clara went. Elizabeth stayed where she was and looked at the man at the gate. He smiled. It was a pleasant smile, the kind that was designed to make the other person feel slightly foolish for being on guard. "Miss Carter," he said. "My name is Aldous Webb. I represent Cornelius Holt's business interests in this county. I wonder if I might have a few minutes of your time." "You may not," she said. The smile did not waver. "I understand you may have some feelings about Mr. Holt." "I have facts about Mr. Holt," she said. "Which is different. Miss Carter. His voice shifted. Still pleasant, but with something underneath it now. Something that wanted her to understand that pleasantness was a choice he was making, and could choose otherwise. Mr. Holt is willing to settle this matter privately, quietly. He is prepared to offer you a fair sum in exchange for certain personal documents you may have retained from your time at his property. Elizabeth looked at him. Those documents are my property, she said. I kept them. I wrote them. Mr. Holt disputes that. Mr. Holt disputes a great deal, she said. He is very comfortable disputing things he knows are true. The man looked at her with the particular expression of someone who has been sent to buy something cheap and is recalculating the price. I would encourage you to consider this carefully, he said. Mr. Holt is a patient man, but he is not infinitely patient. The situation could become a pause. Uncomfortable. Is that a threat? She said. It is a suggestion, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said very clearly, You may tell Mr. Holt that those records are safe. You may tell him that I have no intention of selling them, destroying them, or allowing anyone to take them from me. And you may tell him that if he sends someone to this property again, without an invitation, I will ride to the county seat myself and deliver those records directly to the assessor's office. The man's pleasant expression developed a small crack in it. That would be unwise, he said. I have made unwise decisions before, she said. I survived them. I will survive this too. She held his gaze until he looked away first. He looked away. He turned his horse around and rode back toward town without another word, and Elizabeth stood in the yard and watched him go, and felt her heart hammering against her ribs, and kept her face absolutely still until he was out of sight. Then she turned around. Samuel was standing in the doorway. She had not heard him come out. He was looking at her with an expression that was not quite a 6-year-old's expression, too much knowledge in it, too much recognition. He had heard, or enough of it. Was that man from Holt? He said. Elizabeth looked at him. She could lie. She could soften it. She could send him inside and tell him it was nothing. Yes, she said. Samuel was quiet for a moment. Papa does not like Holt, he said. I know, she said. He says Holt is the kind of man who takes things that aren't his. Elizabeth looked at the boy standing in the doorway, 6 years old, and already carrying knowledge he should not have had to carry, already reading rooms, and understanding the weight of names that adults tried to keep from him. Your father is right, she said. Are you scared? Samuel asked. She considered lying. She decided against it. A little, she said. But I know what I am doing, and I know what I have. Samuel nodded slowly. He looked at the road where the man had been. Then he looked back at her. I can help, he said. Not boastful, not dramatic. Just a 6-year-old boy stating a fact in the straightforward way of someone who has decided to be useful. Elizabeth felt something move through her chest, quick and sharp and warm. I know you can, she said. Come on, let us go check on your sister. She put her hand on his shoulder as they went inside, not in a guiding way, but just there, just present, and he leaned into it slightly, the way he never quite let himself do when anyone was watching, and neither of them said anything about it. Inside, Clara was sitting at the kitchen table with Hector, who was teaching her a card game with the focused seriousness of a man who considered card games to be serious business. He looked up when Elizabeth and Samuel came in, and his eyes asked the question. Elizabeth gave him a small nod. He exhaled through his nose and looked back at his cards. Your deal, he told Clara. Clara dealt the cards with great ceremony and no accuracy whatsoever, and Elizabeth went to the stove and put the kettle on, and the kitchen filled with the ordinary sounds of people being alive and together. And under those sounds, quiet and constant, the knowledge that something was coming. She did not know when. She did not know exactly how. But she knew this when it came. She would not be the woman standing alone in a dirt street while the world looked away. She had records. She had Hector. She had 2 children who were worth fighting for. And somewhere on a cattle road moving south, she had a man who had said, "That is not the only reason I am glad you are." She let herself think about that. Just once. Just briefly. Then she took the kettle off the fire and poured the water and made the tea and called the children to wash their hands, and the afternoon moved forward the way afternoons do, one moment at a time, imperfect and ordinary, and entirely worth protecting. But that night, after the children were asleep and Hector had gone to the bunkhouse and the house was quiet, Elizabeth sat at the kitchen table with her Bible open in front of her and the folded records spread carefully on the wood beside it. And she did something she had not done in years. She prayed. Not for rescue. She had stopped praying for rescue a long time ago. She prayed for clarity, for the kind of cold-eyed, clear-headed certainty that would let her see the next right thing when the moment came and do it without flinching. She prayed for the children to stay safe. She almost prayed for William to come home sooner. She stopped herself before she finished that one. She folded the records back into the Bible. She blew out the lamp. She went to bed. And in the morning she got up and started the coffee and went through the day with the particular determined steadiness of a woman who has decided that being afraid is not the same as being beaten, and that what Cornelius Holt had taken from her in a dirt street in Harlan Creek was her wages and her reputation and her certainty that the world would ever balance out, but not her nerve. That she still had. That she was keeping. Across the territory, on a cattle road moving south under a wide Montana sky, a man named William Dawson rode with his hat pulled low against the sun and thought about a kitchen lamp burning and a woman standing in his doorway saying, "We will be here." He told himself he was thinking about his children. He was a very bad liar. He pushed the horses faster and told himself it was because the drive was behind schedule. He did not look back. But his mind was already home. The second man came on a Thursday. Not alone this time. Elizabeth was in the kitchen when Hector appeared in the doorway with his hat in his hands and his jaw set in the particular way it got when he was about to say something he did not want to say. "3 riders at the gate," he said, "asking for you by name." Elizabeth did not look up from the bread she was kneading. She pressed her palms into the dough and felt the resistance of it and kept her breathing even. "How many of them are Holt's men?" she said. "All 3, Hector said. "The one in front is the same fellow came before." "Webb." She pressed the dough once more. Then she covered it with a cloth and washed her hands and dried them and turned around. "Where are the children?" she said. "Samuel is in the barn. Clara is—" "Get them inside," she said. "Both of them. Tell Samuel I need him to stay with his sister in the back room and not come out until I say." Hector looked at her. "Elizabeth," he said. "I know," she said. "Get the children." He went. She stood in the kitchen for exactly 10 seconds, letting the fear move through her the way she had learned to let it. Not fighting it, not indulging it, just acknowledging it and then setting it aside, because there was no room for it right now. Then she straightened her apron, smoothed her hair, and walked out to the yard. Webb was at the gate with 2 men flanking him who had the look of hired trouble, not dangerous in any complicated way, just large and patient and paid to be present. He smiled when he saw her, the same careful, pleasant smile as before. Except this time, it had an edge to it that had not been there the first visit. "Miss Carter," he said, "you did not take my employer's offer seriously." "I took it very seriously," she said. "I seriously declined it. Mr. Holt thought you might reconsider given additional time to reflect." "He was wrong," she said. Webb looked at her steadily. Then he looked at the house behind her. The calculation in his eyes was not subtle. "You are alone out here," he said. "Largely." "I am not alone," she said. "I have Hector and 3 ranch hands, all of whom are within shouting distance. And I have a very clear understanding of what Mr. Holt wants and why he wants it, which means I also have a very clear understanding of how much trouble those records would cause him if they were to reach the county assessor's desk before his land filing is approved." Something flickered behind Webb's eyes. She kept going. "Those records," she said, "are not on this property. I want you to know that. Whatever you are thinking about doing today, it will not accomplish what you came here to accomplish. The records are somewhere safe with someone who has instructions about what to do with them if I am unable to do it myself." That was a lie. The records were in her Bible in her room 30 feet behind her. But she said it with the absolute steadiness of a woman stating a documented fact, and she watched Webb's pleasant expression develop a second crack alongside the first one, and she held her ground and did not blink. The two men behind Webb exchanged a glance. Webb looked at her for a long moment. Then he settled back in his saddle. "Mr. Holt is not a man who forgets," he said. "Neither am I," she said. "Good day, Mr. Webb." She turned her back on them. She walked back to the house. She did not hurry. She did not look back. She counted her footsteps, 1, 2, 3, and kept her shoulders straight and her pace steady and went through the door and closed it behind her. And then she stood with her back against it and put one hand flat against her sternum and breathed. Her heart was going so fast she could feel it in her throat. Hector appeared from the hallway. "They leaving," he said. She crossed to the window and looked. Webb was still at the gate. He sat his horse and looked at the house for what felt like a very long time. Then he said something to the two men too low to hear, and all three of them turned and rode back toward the road. "They're leaving," she said. Hector let out a long breath through his nose. "For now," he said. "For now," she agreed. She moved away from the window. "I need to get those records out of this house," she said. "Today. Where can we send them that Holt cannot reach?" Hector was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Reverend Marsh in Billings," he said. "He is not connected to Holt in any way. William trusts him. Can we get a rider there by tomorrow?" "If we leave within the hour," Hector said. She nodded. "Then let us leave within the hour." She went to her room and took the Bible from her bag and unfolded the records from the cover and looked at them one last time, 8 months of her own careful handwriting, column after column of figures that told the true story of what Cornelius Holt had been doing with money that was not his to spend. She folded them neatly. She put them in a plain envelope. She sealed it and wrote Reverend Marsh's name on the front in her clearest hand. And then she wrote something else on the inside flap, where it would only be seen when opened a single line that explained what the documents were and who had kept them and why. She gave the envelope to the youngest ranch hand, a boy named Pete, who was 19 and fast, and had the particular reliability of young men who understand that they are being trusted with something real. "Ride straight through," she told him. "Do not stop in Harlan Creek. Do not tell anyone where you are going. Put this directly into Reverend Marsh's hands and no one else's." "Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am," Pete said. "If anyone tries to stop you, they won't stop me," Pete said with the complete confidence of a 19-year-old who has not yet been stopped. She almost smiled. "Go," she said. He went. She watched the dust of his horse settle after he was gone, and then she turned back to the house and found both children standing on the porch watching her with expressions that were too old for their faces. "Is Papa in trouble?" Clara said. "No," Elizabeth said. "Your Papa is fine." "Are you in trouble?" Samuel said. She looked at him. "I am handling it," she said. "That is not what I asked," Samuel said. He was 6 years old, and he said it with the particular directness of a person who has spent considerable time around adults who say things that are technically true and mean nothing. Elizabeth crouched down so she was at his level. "There is a man," she said, "who is trying to take something from me. I am not going to let him. That is all this is." Samuel held her gaze. He was weighing this. She could see him doing it the same way his father weighed things, quietly, thoroughly, without rushing the conclusion. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay," she said. She stood up. "Now come inside," she said. "I have bread rising and somebody needs to help me with the butter." Clara's hand slipped into hers as they went through the door, small and certain, and Elizabeth held it and did not think about how much she would miss this when it was over. She was getting very good at not thinking about that. 3 days passed. They were quiet days on the surface, and not quiet underneath. Hector kept a man near the gate at all hours, casually, without making it obvious, and Elizabeth kept the children close and found reasons for them to be inside when she did not know exactly where every person on the property was. She slept lightly. She woke at every sound. She got up twice in the night to check the doors and came back to bed and lay there listening to the house breathe and told herself she was not frightened. She was frightened, but frightened had not stopped her yet, and she did not intend to let it start. On the fourth day, Ruth Holt came to the ranch. Elizabeth did not know who she was at first. She heard Hector's voice at the gate, low and cautious, and she came out to the porch and saw a woman on horseback alone riding hard. A woman somewhere in her late 40s with a face that had been pretty once and was now something better. All the prettiness burned off and replaced with something that knew things. She was well dressed but dusty from the road, and she was looking at Elizabeth with the particular intensity of someone who has come a long way for a specific purpose. "Elizabeth Carter," she called. "Yes," Elizabeth said. "My name is Ruth Holt," she said. "I wrote you the letter, or I wrote William, but it was meant for you." She paused. "I need to speak with you, please." Elizabeth looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "Hector let her through." She brought Ruth inside and put coffee on because that was what you did, and Ruth sat at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around the cup and did not drink it, just held it the way people hold things when they need something to hold. "You know who I am," Ruth said. "William's wife's sister," Elizabeth said. "Married into the Holt family. Married in and have been trying to get out for 20 years, Ruth said. It was not self-pity. It was a statement of condition the way you describe weather. "Cornelius is my husband's cousin. I have known what he is for a long time. I have not had the means to do anything about it until now." "What changed?" Elizabeth said. "You did," Ruth said. Elizabeth looked at her. Elizabeth looked at. "The records you kept," Ruth said. "I did not know about them until Cornelius started looking for you. He panicked, and Cornelius does not panic, which meant whatever you had was serious. I looked into it. I found out what the records contained." She looked at Elizabeth steadily. "You did not know what you were documenting when you documented it, did you?" "I kept accounts," Elizabeth said. "It was my job." "It was more than accounts," Ruth said. "There is money in those records that connects to a land purchase Cornelius made 3 years ago. A purchase that should not have been possible given his declared holdings at the time. The county assessor is looking at that purchase right now because someone, not me, someone else raised a question about it." She paused. "Your records would answer that question. And the answer would cost Cornelius everything he has spent the last decade building." The kitchen was very quiet. Elizabeth set down her cup. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. Ruth looked at her. Something in her expression shifted something that had been held very carefully behind the practical surface of the conversation. "Because Margaret was my sister," she said. "William's wife. My sister." She stopped. Then, "Cornelius had a hand in what happened to her. Not directly. Not in any way you could bring to a judge. But she came to me 6 months before she died, and she told me things, and I did nothing, because I was afraid, and because I did not know how to do anything that would not destroy my own life in the process. The weight of that settled over the table, like something physical. I have been living with that for 3 years, Ruth said. William does not know. He cannot know what I know not yet, not until I have something solid to give him, instead of just a story that Cornelius will tear apart in an afternoon. She looked at Elizabeth directly. Your records are the something solid. Elizabeth sat with this. She thought about the photograph above the mantel, the serious-faced young woman with Clara's eyes. She thought about William saying, "I lost my wife 3 years ago," in the flat factual tone of a man who had built a wall around the fact because looking at it directly was still too much. She thought about 3 years of silence in a house that had forgotten warmth. She thought about what it would mean for William to know this, and what it would mean for him not to. He needs to know, Elizabeth said. Yes, Ruth said, but not from a stranger, and not before we have made sure those records are secured somewhere Cornelius cannot touch them. I already sent them, Elizabeth said. To Reverend Marsh in Billings, 3 days ago. Ruth's eyes widened. For the first time since she had walked through the door, she looked something other than grimly composed. She looked relieved, genuinely deeply relieved, the relief of someone who has been braced for a blow that did not land. "You sent them already," she said. "I sent them the day Webb came the second time," Elizabeth said. "I knew they were not safe here." Ruth stared at her. Then she laughed, a short surprise sound, nothing performed about it. "Cornelius sent Webb here twice," she said. "Yes. And you sent the records to Billings, and then stood here and told him they were somewhere safe without giving him the name." "Yes." Ruth shook her head. "Lord," she said, "he has no idea." "He will figure it out eventually," Elizabeth said. "Which means we do not have much time." Ruth sobered. "No," she said, "we do not." She looked at Elizabeth with an expression that was close to something, not admiration exactly, but the particular recognition one careful woman gives another when she understands that the person across from her has been navigating something hard and has been doing it well. "Will you trust me," Ruth said, "to help with this?" Elizabeth looked at her. She had very limited experience of the Holt family inspiring trust, but this woman had ridden alone to a ranch 6 miles from town to warn a stranger. She had written a letter, knowing it might be intercepted. She had been carrying a guilt for 3 years that would have broken a less determined person entirely. "Tell me what you need me to do," Elizabeth said. What Ruth needed was a letter. Elizabeth's written account of the records she had kept, what they contained, and the specific transactions she had flagged as irregular during her time at the Holt property. Not the records themselves, which were safe with Reverend Marsh, but a statement in Elizabeth's own words that could be presented to the county assessor alongside them. They sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours, Elizabeth wrote. Ruth listened and occasionally said, "Include that, or that is important, or write that exactly as you said it," and by the end of it, they had 4 pages of Elizabeth's careful handwriting that constituted the clearest account of Cornelius Holt's financial misconduct that had ever existed in documented form. Elizabeth signed it. Ruth witnessed it. They looked at each other across the table. "He is going to know it was me," Ruth said. "When this goes to the assessor." "Yes," Elizabeth said. "My husband." Ruth stopped. Elizabeth waited. "My husband is not a good man," Ruth said, "but he is not Cornelius. When Cornelius falls, my husband will have a choice to make. I believe he will make the right one." She paused. "I have to believe that." Elizabeth heard the shape of what it cost her to say it. "What will you do?" Elizabeth said. "After." Ruth folded the statement carefully and put it in the inside pocket of her coat. "I will go back to my house," she said. "I will make supper, and I will not say a word, and I will wait for this to move through the system the way it moves, which will take weeks and possibly months." She stood. "And in the meantime, I would encourage you to stay close to this ranch and let Mr. Dawson know what is happening the moment he returns." She moved toward the door. Then she stopped. She turned back. "She would have liked you," Ruth said. "Margaret, she would have liked you very much." Elizabeth could not speak for a moment. "Go carefully," she said finally. Ruth nodded. She put her hat on and went out, and the sound of her horse faded away down the road, and Elizabeth stood in the kitchen with the coffee going cold on the table, and the afternoon light coming through the window, and the absolute stillness of the house around her. Clara came in from the hallway. She had been listening. Elizabeth had suspected as much. "Who was that lady?" Clara said. "Someone trying to make something right," Elizabeth said. "Did she?" Clara said. Elizabeth thought about 4 pages of her own handwriting, about records sitting safe with a reverend in Billings, about a woman who had been carrying guilt for 3 years and had finally found something to do with it. "She started to," Elizabeth said. "That is what matters right now." Clara considered this with the seriousness she gave to most things. "Is it going to be okay?" she said. Elizabeth looked at her. This child who had her mother's eyes. This child who braided her own hair now because Elizabeth had taught her. This child who had stopped having nightmares because Elizabeth had sat with her through enough of them. "Yes," Elizabeth said. She said it like she meant it. She was working on meaning it. The letter from William came 4 days later. It was brief. He was not a man who wrote long letters, but it said 2 things that mattered. The drive was finishing early a week ahead of schedule, and he had heard through the particular network of rumor and whispered news that moves across frontier territory, like weather, that there had been trouble near his property. He was coming home. He would be there in 6 days. Elizabeth read the letter twice. Then she folded it and put it in her apron pocket and kept it there for the rest of the day in the way you keep something close that you need to be able to touch. That evening, Samuel found her sitting on the porch after supper. He sat down beside her without asking if that was all right, because he had stopped asking permission for things like that and had started simply doing them, which she had noticed and not said anything about because she did not want to break whatever it was by naming it. They sat in the quiet for a while. "Papa's coming home," Samuel said. "He is," she said. 6 days. 6 days. Samuel was quiet. Then, "Are you going to tell him about Holt and Webb and all of it?" "Everything," she said. "He deserves to know everything." "He's going to be angry," Samuel said. It was not a warning, just a statement about his father that he made with the calm familiarity of someone who knows a person well enough to predict them. "He has a right to be angry," Elizabeth said. "He gets quiet when he is angry," Samuel said. "Not loud, just very quiet." Elizabeth thought about that. "I know," she said. Samuel looked at her sideways. "You know," he said. She realized what she had said and caught herself. "I imagine," she said. "It seems like something he would do." Samuel looked at her for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then he looked back out at the road and said, "I am glad you are here." The words were simple. He said them in the same matter-of-fact tone he used for everything, the tone that made it clear that he was stating a fact and not asking for a reaction. But Elizabeth felt them in the center of her chest, like a struck bell, clean and resonant and lasting. "I am glad I am here too," she said. He nodded once. He got up and went inside. She sat on the porch for a long time after that, in the cooling evening air, and let herself feel the full weight of what was coming. William was 6 days out. Cornelius Holt was somewhere in the territory running out of options and getting more dangerous as they ran out. Ruth Holt was sitting in her house with 4 pages of documented evidence in her coat pocket and a husband she was hoping would choose correctly when the moment came. And she was here, sitting on the porch of a house that was not hers, sitting here like it was. She was still turning all of it over in her mind when she heard it, a horse on the road, moving fast, coming toward the gate. Not 1 horse, 2. She stood up and listened, and something in the sound of it was wrong in the specific way that sounds at night are wrong when they are moving with purpose rather than returning from somewhere. Hector came out of the bunkhouse. He had heard it too. They looked at each other across the dark yard. "Get inside," he said. "Take the children to the back room." "Hector." "Elizabeth." His voice was not loud. It was the voice of a man who had been on this ranch a long time and knew exactly what it needed right now. "Please, take the children to the back room and stay there." She went. She got both children up. Samuel wordless and instantly awake, Clara groggy and confused, and brought them to the back room and told them to be quiet and stay down, and she would be right back. Samuel looked at her with eyes that were too knowing. "What is happening?" he said. "I do not know yet," she said. "Stay here." She went back down the hall and stopped at the end of it just inside the house where she could see through the front window without being seen. The riders had stopped at the gate. There were 4 of them this time. Webb was not among them. These were different men, rougher the kind who are not sent for conversation. They sat their horses at the gate, and one of them was talking to Hector. And Hector was standing his ground with his arms loose at his sides and his voice low, and his entire body carrying the particular stillness of a man who is deciding whether this is the moment. Elizabeth moved to the kitchen. She opened the cabinet beside the fireplace. She took out the shotgun that William kept there and checked it the way she had been taught. Break it. Check the chambers, close it, and she went back to the front of the house and stood in the shadow of the doorway and watched. One of the riders dismounted. He walked to the gate. He said something to Hector that she could not hear from here, and Hector said loudly, clearly, so there was no possibility of misunderstanding, "This is private property and you are not welcome on it. Leave now." The man looked at the house. He looked directly at the shadow where Elizabeth was standing. She stepped into the light of the doorway. She let him see the shotgun. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked back at his companions. Something passed between them, a calculation, a reassessment. The man stepped back from the gate. He mounted his horse. All four of them turned and rode back down the road without a word. Elizabeth stood in the doorway with the shotgun in her hands, and the night air cold against her face, and her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth. Hector crossed the yard. He looked at the shotgun. He looked at her. "Good," he said. "Just that. Just good." She lowered the gun. "Tomorrow," she said, "I am sending another rider. To William. He will be 5 days out by then," Hector said. "Then he needs to ride faster," she said. Hector almost smiled. It was a grim thing, that almost smile, but it was real. "I will find you a fast rider," he said. She went back inside. She returned the shotgun to the cabinet. She went to the back room and found Samuel sitting on the floor, with his arms around Clara, who had fallen back asleep against his shoulder, with the complete helpless trust of a child who has decided that her brother is a safe place to be. Samuel looked up at her. "Is it done?" he said. She crouched in front of him. "For tonight," she said. He looked at his sister. Then he looked at Elizabeth. "She wasn't scared," he said quietly. "Because you were here." Elizabeth looked at the boy holding his sleeping sister in the dark. She thought about every reason she had to leave this place. Every practical, sensible, self-protective reason. Every argument her scared and tired mind had been making for weeks about why getting attached was dangerous and staying was foolish and hope was a trap. She thought about all of it. And then she thought about Clara sleeping against Samuel's shoulder because she felt safe, because Elizabeth was here. "Go back to sleep," Elizabeth said softly. "Both of you. I will be right outside the door." She settled herself in the hallway with her back against the wall, and she stayed there until the house went fully quiet, and she was certain nothing else was coming tonight. And somewhere in the small hours before dawn, a man named William Dawson on a cattle road 2 days closer than his letter had said, because he had pushed harder than he planned, because something kept pulling at him that he did not have a name for, yet looked up at the Montana sky and told himself he was riding fast because of the drive schedule. He was a very bad liar. He had always been a very bad liar. He pushed the horses faster and did not stop to examine why, and the miles between him and home got shorter, one at a time, and somewhere in the dark of a ranch house 6 miles east of Harlan Creek, a woman sat in a hallway with her back against the wall and kept watch over 2 sleeping children, and waited for morning to come. William Dawson rode through the gate of his own ranch at 4:30 in the morning. He had not slept in 2 days. He had pushed his horse harder than was fair, and made up 3 days on the road in a way that would have seemed impossible to anyone who did not understand what it felt like to be pulled toward something with a force that had no practical explanation. He told himself the entire ride that he was coming back because of the rider Elizabeth had sent. Because of the news that men had come to his gate twice and come back a 3rd time with reinforcements. Because his children were in that house, and he was their father, and his place was with them. All of that was true. None of it was the whole truth. He rode through the gate and across the dark yard, and swung down from his horse, and before he had finished tying the reins, the front door opened. Elizabeth was standing in the doorway with a lamp in her hand. She was dressed. She had not been asleep. She looked at him across the yard with an expression that was not relief, Not quite. It was something more controlled than relief. The face of a woman who had been holding a great deal together for a long time, and had just felt the first thing shift that she had not been holding alone. She said nothing. Neither did he. He crossed the yard. He stopped when he was close enough that she did not have to raise her voice, and he looked at her face in the lamplight, and took in the shadows under her eyes, and the set of her jaw, and the way she was standing straight, composed, entirely steady, in the way that only people who have been afraid for a very long time and have refused to bend under it look. "You are all right," he said. It was not a question. He said it the way you say something you needed to be true, and are only now allowing yourself to believe it. "I am all right," she said. "The children." "Sleeping. They are fine." He let out a long breath through his nose and looked at the ground for a moment. Then he looked back up at her. "Tell me everything," he said. They went inside. She put coffee on because her hands needed something to do, and he sat at the kitchen table, and she stood at the stove, and she told him. All of it. Webb's first visit, and the letter from Ruth, and the records she had sent to Reverend Marsh in Billings, and Webb's second visit, and Ruth coming in person, and the 4 pages of documented statements she and Ruth had put together, and the 4 riders who had come in the night and found her standing in the doorway with a shotgun. William listened without interrupting. He sat with his hands flat on the table and his jaw tight, and he listened, and the only indication of what it was doing to him was a single muscle in the side of his face that had been working steadily since she said the words, 4 riders in the night. When she finished, the kitchen was quiet. "You sent the records to Marsh," he said. "Before the second visit," she said. "I did not tell Webb where they were." "And Ruth came here, to this house." "Yes." He was quiet. "Did you know," Elizabeth said, "about the land filing? About what Cornelius was doing?" "I knew some of it," he said. "I knew Cornelius had been pushing on the eastern boundary claim for 2 years. I knew it had something to do with money that was not clean." He paused. "I did not know he had someone on his property keeping records that documented it." Elizabeth watched his face. "William," she said, "Ruth told me something else." Something in his stillness shifted a different quality of listening, the way a body changes when it is bracing for something it cannot name, but can feel coming. "About Margaret," Elizabeth said. He said nothing. "She said your wife came to her 6 months before she died," Elizabeth said carefully. "She said Margaret told her things, about Cornelius." The muscle in his jaw went rigid. "What things?" he said. His voice was very flat and very quiet. "She did not tell me the specifics," Elizabeth said. "She said she did not have enough to bring to a judge. She said the records would give her something solid." She paused. "She said Cornelius had a hand in what happened. Not directly." The kitchen was absolutely silent. William sat at his table in the house he had built, and the house his wife had lived in, and the house his children had grown up in without their mother. And he did not move for a very long time. Then he said in a voice that was barely above a whisper, and was the most controlled thing she had ever heard a human being produce. "She came to Ruth." "Yes." 6 months before. "Yes." He looked at his hands on the table. Elizabeth stood at the stove and did not speak, and did not look away from him, and did not offer him comfort because he did not need comfort. Right now, he needed space. The particular kind of space that allows a man to feel something enormous without an audience performing concern at him. After a long time, he said, "She never told me." "No," Elizabeth said. "She was protecting me," he said. Not a question. He knew his wife. He knew what she would have done. "She found out something, and she went to Ruth instead of me, because she knew what I would have done." He looked up. His eyes were dry. The kind of dry that comes after something has moved past the place where tears live, and into the place where only action exists. "What would you have done?" Elizabeth said quietly. He looked at her. "Something that would have gotten me killed or jailed," he said. Or both. She nodded. He looked back at his hands. And then she died, he said. And I never knew. And Cornelius... He stopped. The records will take him apart, Elizabeth said. Ruth has the statement. Reverend Marsh has the documentation. What Cornelius built his land filing on is going to fall apart in front of the county assessor, and it will take most of what he owns with it. That is not enough, William said. I know, she said, but it is what we have right now, and it is real, and it is documented, and it cannot be dismissed. She paused. It is more than he has ever had to face before. William sat with that. He was quiet for a long time. Then something in his posture shifted, not softened, but reorganized the way a man reorganizes when he has absorbed something and decided what to do with it. I need to ride to Billings, he said, to Marsh. I need to see those records myself. Yes, she said, and I need to talk to Ruth. Yes. And I need to go see Cornelius Holt. William? Not the way you are thinking, he said. He looked at her directly. I am not going to do something that gets me killed or jailed. I am going to look him in the eye and let him know that I know. That is all. She held his gaze. She believed him. She was not entirely sure she should believe him, but she did. After the children are up, she said. After breakfast. Not at 5 in the morning. Something passed over his face that might in better circumstances have been the beginning of a smile. After breakfast, he agreed. She turned back to the stove. He stayed at the table, and the coffee finished, and she poured 2 cups and set one in front of him, and kept one for herself, and they sat in the kitchen in the early hours of the morning while the house slept around them, and for a little while neither of them said anything, because everything that needed to be said had been said, and everything that still needed to happen had not happened yet, and there was nothing wrong with the space in between. Elizabeth, William said. She looked at him. You stood in that doorway with a shotgun, he said, against 4 men. Yes, she said, alone. Hector was at the gate, she said. You stood in that doorway, he said again, with a shotgun in the dark to protect my children. She looked at him steadily. They are worth protecting, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. The lamplight was between them, and his eyes were very dark and very clear, and she held his gaze because looking away would have been a kind of lie. Yes, he said quietly. They are. He did not say anything else. He did not have to. Clara found him at the kitchen table at 6 in the morning and went completely to pieces in the best possible way, all arms and noise and absolute relief, the crying of a child who has been holding herself together and has finally found the person she needed to fall apart with. William held her and said nothing and looked over her head at Elizabeth with an expression she filed away somewhere safe inside herself. Samuel came in and stood in the doorway and looked at his father. You're back early, Samuel said. I am, William said. Good, Samuel said. He sat down at the table and reached across and covered his father's hand with his own small one for exactly 3 seconds, the most physical affection Samuel Dawson had ever voluntarily offered in Elizabeth's presence. Then he picked up his fork and said, Is there eggs? There are eggs, Elizabeth said. She made breakfast. It felt like the most ordinary thing in the world, and it was completely extraordinary, and she was aware of both of those things simultaneously, and did not know what to do with either of them. After breakfast, William rode out. He went to Ruth first. He was gone 3 hours. When he came back, his face was very still in the way it got when he had heard something that had rearranged the world as he understood it. He unsaddled his horse and came inside and stood in the kitchen and looked at Elizabeth. She told me, he said, what Margaret told her. Elizabeth waited. You should know, he said, because you are part of this now. What Cornelius did, what he arranged it was about money. Margaret had inherited a piece of land from her father. Small, but it bordered Cornelius's eastern claim. He needed it. He offered to buy it. She refused. He stopped. After she died, the land transferred to me automatically, which is why Cornelius cannot finalize the filing without dealing with me, or dealing with someone connected to the original property records. Elizabeth went very still. "That is why he came after me," she said slowly. "You were a loose end," William said. "He needed you discredited or gone before the assessor started looking. Your records showed money moving from his accounts to a specific transaction he was trying to hide. A payment." His jaw tightened. "A payment to a man who is no longer in this territory." The word hung in the air between them, and neither of them said it out loud, and neither of them needed to. "Ruth is going to testify," William said. "She has agreed. She has documentation of her own that she has been keeping for 2 years. Combined with what you have sent to Marsh." He stopped. He looked at her. "Elizabeth, this is going to be enough. What you kept, what you held on to when you had every reason to let it go. It is going to be enough." She thought about herself in that dirt street in Harlan Creek. The scattered coins, the turned backs. The choice to keep those records tucked inside her Bible when throwing them away would have been so much lighter and so much easier. She had not known what she was carrying. She had only known it was hers, and no one was taking it. "What happens now?" she said. "I ride to Billings tomorrow," he said. "I go to Marsh and I take the records to the county assessor myself. Ruth will meet us there. Her husband." He paused. "Her husband is going with her." Elizabeth looked at him. "He chose right?" she said. "He chose right," William confirmed. He looked at her steadily. "I want you to come with me," he said. "To Billings. I know it is a lot to ask. The children will stay with Hector and the hands they have done it before, but your account, your testimony about the records, about what you observed, about what Cornelius's man said when he came to this gate, it matters. Your word in person in front of an assessor matters." "Of course I will come," Elizabeth said. He looked at her like he had not been entirely certain of that answer and was adjusting to having it. "You do not have to," he said. "William," she said, "I have been fighting this man since before I knew what I was fighting him about. I am not stopping now." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "All right," he said. "We leave at first light." They left at first light. The ride to Billings took most of the day, and they rode in the comfortable quiet of people who have run out of the need to fill silence. Occasionally talking about practical things, the route the children, how long the process would take at the assessor's office, and occasionally not talking at all, which was its own kind of conversation. At one point, somewhere in the middle of the day, on a long flat stretch of road, William said without preamble, "How long did you know about Ruth's letter before you opened it?" She glanced at him. "One evening," she said. "You debated it." "Yes." "And then you opened it anyway." "I was alone in that house with your children," she said. "Something connected to the Holt name had just arrived at the gate. I was not going to sit on it." He nodded. "I would have done the same," he said. "I know," she said. "That is partly why I did it." He looked at her sideways. She kept her eyes on the road. "You made decisions the whole time I was gone," he said. "Good ones, hard ones, ones I could not have made better myself." "I had help," she said. "Hector, Ruth, Pete the rider who went to Billings." "They were your decisions," he said. "You organized them. You held it together." She did not know what to do with that, so she looked at the road and said nothing, and he seemed to understand that that was not the moment to push it further, and they rode on. Reverend Marsh was a compact, serious man with kind eyes and the handshake of someone who means what he does. He had kept the records in his church safe and produced them immediately when William presented himself with the air of a man who had understood the weight of what he was holding and had not taken it lightly. He looked at Elizabeth when William introduced her. "You are the one who kept these," he said. "Yes," she said. 8 months, he said. "Every transaction." "Yes." He looked at her with an expression she recognized, the particular expression people give you when they have seen evidence of who you are, and it has answered a question. "It is good work," he said simply. "Careful, thorough, honest work." She had been called many things since Harlan Creek. That was the best thing anyone had said to her. They went to the county assessor's office the next morning. William, Elizabeth, Ruth, and Ruth's husband, Daniel, a quiet, heavy-set man, who walked 2 steps behind his wife, with the careful attention of someone demonstrating with his body that he understood what was required of him. Ruth walked into that office like a woman who had been waiting 20 years for a door to open and had finally found the right key. The assessor was a thin, careful man named Price, who had the look of someone who had seen a great deal of paperwork and very little drama, and was now looking at 4 people standing in his office with the combined air of a reckoning and trying to calibrate how much of his morning this was going to consume. It consumed all of it. Elizabeth gave her account in the clear, precise way she did everything. Not dramatic, not embellished. Exactly what happened in the order. It happened with the specific details that made it impossible to dismiss as a woman's feeling about a man she disliked. She set her statement on the assessor's desk alongside the 8 months of records and Reverend Marsh's written attestation that the documents had been in his keeping untouched. Price read through everything without speaking for 45 minutes. Nobody in the room made a sound. Clara had once asked Elizabeth what courage felt like back in the first week when Elizabeth had sat with her through the tail end of a nightmare, and Clara had asked in the drowsy, honest way of half-asleep children whether being brave was hard. Elizabeth had told her it was mostly just about deciding to keep going, even when you were scared. She thought about that now sitting in a chair in a county assessor's office in Billings, Montana, while a thin, careful man read 8 months of her handwriting and the future of a great deal of things sat balanced on whatever he was about to say. She was scared. She kept going. Price set the documents down. He looked at Elizabeth. He looked at William. He looked at Ruth. "I am going to need to make some inquiries," he said carefully. "This level of financial irregularity, if documented as thoroughly as these records suggest." He stopped. "Mr. Holt's land filing will be suspended pending investigation. Immediately. This afternoon." Ruth let out a breath. Just one. Small and controlled. "The inquiry," William said. "How long?" "Weeks," Price said. "Possibly longer. This is not something we move through quickly, but..." He looked at the records. "We move through it." "Will he know?" Elizabeth said. "Will Holt know today that the filing has been suspended?" "He will know when I send the formal notice to his attorney," Price said, "which will be by end of business today." She thought about what that would mean. Cornelius Holt receiving notice that his land filing was suspended on the same day that he found out the records he had been hunting had been sitting in a county assessor's office for the past 24 hours. She thought about what a man like that did when he ran out of moves. William was thinking the same thing. She could see it. "He will come to the ranch," William said. "Yes," she said. "Then we go home today," he said. "We ride straight back." They made it home by nightfall. The children were safe. Hector confirmed it immediately, both fine, both fed, both asleep. Elizabeth went to check anyway, standing in the doorway of their room with a lamp in her hand and watching the slow rise and fall of their breathing. And she felt something move through her that she was not going to examine closely right now, because if she did, she would sit down in the hallway and not get up. She went back to the kitchen. William was at the table with 2 cups of coffee already poured, and she sat across from him and wrapped both hands around the cup, and they sat in the silence for a while. "He will come tomorrow," William said. "Or tonight," she said. He shook his head. "He is not stupid. He comes at night, and it looks like what it is. He comes in the morning in daylight, and it is still a visit between men with a long history." He paused. "He will want to look me in the eye. Men like Cornelius always want to look you in the eye when they think they still have something to say." "Does he," Elizabeth said, "still have something to say?" William looked at her. "No," he said, "but he does not know that yet." She held his gaze across the table. "William," she said, "when he comes..." "I will handle it," he said. "I know you will," she said. "I am asking you to let me be there." He looked at her steadily. She held his gaze and did not look away, and did not soften it, because she meant it without softening. "This started with me," she said. "In a dirt street in Harlan Creek. I was there. I was the one standing alone in the street when nobody would look at me." She paused. "I want to be there when it ends." William was quiet for a long moment. The lamplight moved between them. Then he said, "All right." One word. But it was the word that meant he saw her. Not as someone he was protecting, as someone who had earned the right to stand next to him when the reckoning came. She nodded. She drank her coffee. Outside, the Montana night was deep and still, and the stars were enormous overhead, and the ranch sat quiet in the dark, and inside a kitchen, with a lamp burning low. Two people sat across a table from each other and did not talk about what they were not talking about, and somehow that was enough. He came at 10 in the morning. Cornelius Holt rode through the gate of the Dawson Ranch alone, which was either confidence or calculation, or both, and Elizabeth suspected both. He was a man who understood appearances the way craftsmen understand their tools. He came alone because coming with men would mean he was afraid, and he had not yet decided he was afraid. He was not what she had expected. She had expected something more obvious, some clearer mark of what he was. But he was simply a man in his late 50s, well-made, the kind of handsome that had settled into authority over the years, riding a good horse and wearing a good coat, and carrying himself with the ease of someone who had never in his life been told no in a way that stuck. William was in the yard. He had been in the yard since 9, not ostentatiously just present working, moving, doing the ordinary things of a working ranch, and when Cornelius rode through the gate, he stopped what he was doing and turned and watched him come and did not move toward him or away from him. Elizabeth was on the porch. Cornelius's gaze went to her first. He looked at her with an expression she could not fully read. Complex, layered the look of a man encountering a problem that has turned out to be more persistent than anticipated. Then he looked at William. "William," he said. "Cornelius," William said. Cornelius dismounted. He was careful about it, deliberate the way powerful men are deliberate about physical things in front of other men. "Heard you went to Billings," Cornelius said pleasantly. "I did," William said. "Assessor's office." "That's right." Cornelius looked at him. The pleasantness on his face was intact, but it had a different quality now, thinner, like paper held up to light. "You know this is going to be a complicated situation," Cornelius said. "These records, whatever that woman told them. That woman's name is Elizabeth Carter," William said, "and what she told them is documented in her own handwriting across 8 months of accounts that she kept because that is the kind of woman she is. Careful, thorough, honest." He let that settle. "Unlike some." Cornelius's jaw moved slightly. "I had those accounts audited," he said. "My own people." "Your own people," William said, "are named in the records, by amount and by date." He paused. "So is the payment, the one from 3 years ago." The air between them changed. Something left Cornelius's face, not the composure, not yet, but the thing underneath the composure, the absolute bedrock certainty that he was untouchable. It cracked just slightly, just enough. "You do not know what you are talking about," Cornelius said. "Margaret came to Ruth," William said. His voice was very quiet. 6 months before she died. "Did you know that—" Cornelius said nothing. "She told Ruth what you were doing," William said. "Ruth has been keeping her own records, her own account of what she knew and when she knew it." He looked at Cornelius with the clear, cold steadiness of a man who has had one night to absorb something enormous and has come out the other side of it resolved. "Ruth testified yesterday. To the assessor. Her husband was with her." Cornelius blinked. It was the first involuntary thing Elizabeth had seen him do. That single blink, the fractional reset of a man whose calculations have just been completely overturned. "Daniel," he said. It came out flat. "Daniel," William confirmed. A long silence. Cornelius looked at Elizabeth on the porch. She looked back at him. She did not say anything. She did not need to. She had said everything she needed to say in a dirt street in Harlan Creek 7 weeks ago, and she had said it in 8 months of careful numbers, and she had said it in a county assessor's office in Billings, with her hands steady and her voice clear. She was done speaking to this man. She simply looked at him, and he looked at her. And for the first time in all of it all, the manipulation and the dismissal and the threat and the men at the gate and the tampered letter and the long weeks of fear and holding and not bending, she watched something move through Cornelius Holt's eyes that she recognized. He knew it was over. He had known it since the moment William had said the word payment. But she watched him finish, knowing it now completely in the particular way of men who have spent their lives being the ones who decide when things are over. This time, someone else had decided. William took one step forward. "Get off my land, Cornelius," he said. It was very quiet. "Do not come back." Cornelius Holt straightened. He settled his coat. He put his hat back precisely where it had been. He mounted his horse with the same deliberate care he had dismounted with, and he turned the horse around, and he rode back through the gate without looking at either of them. Elizabeth watched him go. She watched until he was off the road and out of sight. Then she let out a breath. Just one. Small and controlled. Like Ruth in the assessor's office, like a woman who has been holding her breath for a very long time and has finally found a place where it is safe to breathe. William crossed the yard and came to the porch and stopped at the bottom of the steps and looked up at her. She looked down at him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then she said, "He's gone." "He's gone," William said. He was looking at her the way he had looked at her when he rode in before dawn 2 mornings ago. That particular look, the one that said something he was not going to say out loud, except this time it was slightly different, slightly closer to the surface, like a man who is reconsidering the distance between what he feels and what he is willing to say. "Elizabeth," he said. "William," she said. The children came barreling out the front door. Clara first, then Samuel, at a slightly more dignified pace that he abandoned entirely when he saw his father standing in the yard. And the moment broke, the way moments do, when children arrive cleanly and without ceremony. And William caught Clara, and Samuel came to stand beside Elizabeth and looked up at her. "Is it done?" he said. She looked at him, this boy who had been asking her that question in various forms since the night 4 riders came to the gate. "Yes," she said. "It is done." Samuel nodded. He reached out and took her hand. Not the reaching of a child seeking comfort. The reaching of a person who has decided to claim something. She held on. Samuel's hand in hers. That was what she kept coming back to in the days that followed. Not the look on Cornelius Holt's face when the certainty drained out of it. Not the moment William said, "Get off my land," and meant every syllable. Not even the breath she had finally let herself release when Cornelius rode through the gate and did not come back. What she kept coming back to was a 6-year-old boy reaching out and taking her hand in the yard of his father's ranch like it was the most natural thing in the world, like it was already decided, like she was already his. She did not know what to do with that. She did a great deal of cooking instead. The week after Cornelius Holt rode away from the Dawson Ranch, the world reorganized itself in the quiet, bureaucratic way that worlds reorganize when powerful men are finally held accountable for the things they have done. Word came from Billings that the land filing had been formally suspended. Word came from Ruth through a letter that arrived unsealed and untampered, because there was no longer anyone paying to open letters on that road, that the assessor's inquiry had expanded to include 3 additional transactions flagged by Elizabeth's records. Word came from a source Hector would not name, which meant it was reliable that 2 of Cornelius Holt's longest-standing business associates had quietly begun distancing themselves from his enterprises in the particular way that rats leave ships before anyone else has noticed the water. Cornelius Holt was not finished. Not yet. Men like him were never finished quickly. They had too many layers of insulation, too many attorneys, too many favors owed by too many people who were too comfortable to want those favors examined closely. But he was wounded, and he knew it, and William knew it, and Elizabeth knew it. What she did not know, what she was working very hard not to spend too much time thinking about, was what came next for her specifically. The original arrangement had been temporary. Care for the children while William was on the cattle drive. 4 weeks, maybe 5. She had been here nearly 2 months. The drive was long finished. The crisis, while not fully resolved, had moved out of the immediate and into the institutional, where it would grind forward without requiring her presence at the Dawson Ranch to do so. She could leave. There was nothing contractually holding her here. She had wages. William had paid her every week without fail more than the original agreed amount with the quiet matter-of-factness of a man correcting an imbalance. She had enough to get to another town, find another position, start the careful business of building something again somewhere new. She could leave. She started mentally packing her bag on a Wednesday evening, standing at the kitchen window after supper, not because she wanted to leave, but because wanting to stay had started to feel dangerous in a way she did not entirely trust herself to manage. Clara appeared at her elbow. "What are you thinking about?" Clara said. "Nothing important," Elizabeth said. Clara leaned against her arm in the way she had been doing since the second week, that small particular lean, just pressure, just presence. "You have a face," Clara said. "Everyone has a face," Elizabeth said. "You have a thinking face," Clara said. "Not the regular thinking face, the other one." Elizabeth looked down at her. "What other one?" she said. "The one you get when you are thinking about going somewhere," Clara said. The kitchen was very quiet. Elizabeth looked at this child, this 7-year-old girl who had her mother's eyes and her father's directness, and who had been reading Elizabeth's face for 2 months with the focused attention of someone who understood that the person in front of her was important, and that important things needed to be watched carefully. "Clara," she said. "Are you going to leave?" Clara said. Not accusatory, not pleading, just direct the way Clara was always direct, the way she asked questions because she needed the actual answer and had learned that the actual answer was always better than the comfortable one. Elizabeth looked at her for a long moment. "I do not know," she said. It was the most honest answer she had. Clara considered this with the seriousness she gave to most things. "Papa does not want you to leave," she said. Elizabeth's chest tightened. "Clara, he talks different when you are in the room," Clara said. "He talked different before too. Before Mama. And then after Mama, he stopped. And now he talks different again." She looked up at Elizabeth with complete, uncalculated certainty. "That means something." Elizabeth did not have words for a moment. She was standing in a kitchen being told the most important thing anyone had said to her in years by a 7-year-old who had no idea she was doing it. "Your papa and I," she started carefully. "I know you are not our mama," Clara said. "I am not a baby. I know you are not her." She paused. "But you are you, and we like you, and that is different from Mama, but it is not less." Elizabeth put her arm around Clara's shoulders. She did not trust herself to speak. Clara let herself be held for a moment, then straightened with the practicality of a child who has said what needed saying, and considers the matter settled. "I am going to go finish my book," she said. "All right," Elizabeth managed. Clara went. Elizabeth stood at the kitchen window for a long time after that. William found her there an hour later. He came in from the yard and stopped when he saw her still standing at the window, and he read something in the set of her shoulders that made him not go past the doorway. "You are thinking about leaving," he said. She turned around. He was looking at her with that expression she had catalogued over 2 months, without meaning to, the one that was not quite readable, the one that said more than he was permitting himself to say. Except tonight, it was closer to the surface than usual. Tonight, the distance between what was in his face and what he was willing to say out loud was smaller than she had ever seen it. "The original arrangement is finished," she said. "The drive is done. The immediate danger has passed. The inquiry is still ongoing," he said. "I am not needed for the inquiry," she said. "Reverend Marsh has the records. Ruth has the statement. Price has everything he needs." William was quiet. "Is that why you would stay?" he said. "Because you are needed for the inquiry?" She looked at him. "No," she said. "Then say what you actually mean," he said. Not harsh, just direct. The way he was always direct when he had decided a thing was important enough to be direct about. She looked at him across the kitchen. She thought about a dirt road outside Harlan Creek on a July morning, and a wagon that slowed, and a little girl's hand reaching out across the space between them. She thought about 2 months of ordinary mornings and difficult evenings, and the particular texture of a life that fit. She thought about a man at a kitchen table before dawn saying, "You are all right," like he had needed to say it. She thought about Samuel's hand closing around hers in the yard. "I do not want to leave," she said. The words came out plainly without decoration, because that was the only way she knew how to say them. William crossed the kitchen. He stopped close enough that she would have had to take a step back if she wanted distance between them, and she did not take a step back. "Then do not leave," he said. "William, Elizabeth." He said her name the way he said things that mattered, quietly, finally. "I am not asking you to replace something. I am not asking you to be something you are not." He looked at her steadily. "I am asking you to stay, because this house is better with you in it, because my children are better, because I am—" He stopped. She waited. "I am better," he said. "I did not expect that. I was not looking for it. But it is true, and I am not a man who looks away from true things because they are inconvenient." She looked at him. She thought about every practical reason this was complicated. Every way it could go wrong. Every version of this conversation in which she was a woman with no family and no history in this territory, and no claim on anything here except what had been built over 2 months of extraordinary circumstances. She thought about all of it. And then she thought about Clara saying that means something. "All right," she said. He blinked. It was the second time she had said all right to him in 2 months. The first time was on a dirt road with a cloth bag in her hand and nothing else. This time she had considerably more. "All right," he said. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then she said, "You should know that I am not easy to live with." "Neither am I," he said. "I have opinions about how things should be done." "I have noticed," he said. Something in his face shifted that almost smile, the one she had catalogued as carefully as everything else. "I reorganized your kitchen in the first week," she said. "I know," he said. "I could find everything better afterward." She almost laughed. She caught it before it escaped, but he saw it. She could tell by the way his expression changed, by the particular quality of attention he gave her in the moment it nearly happened. "Stay," he said. "That is all I am asking. Stay and we will figure out the rest." She nodded. Just once. But she meant it. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday afternoon, when the light was golden and long across the land, William Dawson rode into Harlan Creek. He rode in alone, which was a choice. He could have brought men. He had enough of them. He could have made it a statement of force, the kind of entrance that announced itself before it arrived. He chose not to. He rode in the way he rode everywhere steadily without ceremony, and he went to 3 places. He went to the bank where he had a conversation with the manager that lasted 40 minutes and ended with the manager looking considerably more uncomfortable than when it started. He went to the general store where he paid Elizabeth's full 8 months of outstanding wages in front of the proprietor and 2 other customers in cash drawn from Cornelius Holt's suspended accounts through a legal process that Price's office had facilitated. And he said clearly and without raising his voice that these wages had been illegally withheld and were being returned to their rightful owner. And he went to the church. He did not stay long at the church. He spoke to Reverend Gaines, who had been standing in front of his congregation every Sunday for the past 2 months, while Elizabeth was on the Dawson Ranch. And he said also, clearly also without raising his voice, that a woman named Elizabeth Carter had been publicly accused of theft in this town on false grounds by a man who is currently under formal inquiry by the county assessor's office, and that this congregation and this community owed her the same public acknowledgement of her innocence that they had extended to her guilt. Reverend Gaines said he would address it on Sunday. William said he would be there to hear it. He rode home. He told Elizabeth none of this until the following Monday, when a letter arrived from the bank confirming the wage transfer, and he set it on the kitchen table in front of her without comment. She read it. She looked up. "When did you do this?" she said. "Last Saturday," he said. She looked at him. "You did not tell me you were going," she said. "No," he said. "Why not?" He looked at her steadily. "Because you would have told me not to." She opened her mouth. She closed it. She looked at the letter in her hands. 8 months of wages. Her wages. The money she had stood in a dirt street and demanded and been publicly mocked for claiming she was owed. "The church," she said. "Did Reverend Gaines actually—" "On Sunday," William said. "Ruth was there. She sent word." Elizabeth set the letter down carefully on the table. She looked at it for a long moment. She thought about the woman who had walked away from Harlan Creek with a cloth bag and a broken heart and 8 months of unpaid work and the kind of bone-deep weariness that comes from discovering that the world does not balance out. She thought about what it would have meant to that woman to know this was coming. She thought about what it meant now. "Thank you," she said. It was not enough. She knew it was not enough. But it was what she had. William nodded. "It was yours," he said simply. "It was always yours." The inquiry into Cornelius Holt's financial conduct concluded 6 weeks later. The formal findings came to William by post, forwarded from Price's office in Billings, and he read them at the kitchen table on a Thursday evening, while Elizabeth made supper and the children did their lessons at the other end of the table. He read the whole document without expression, and then he set it down and said nothing for a moment. "Well," Samuel said without looking up from his book. "The land filing is permanently denied," William said. "The eastern boundary claim is nullified. There are 3 additional counts of financial misconduct referred to the territorial court." "What does that mean?" Clara said. "It means he lost," Samuel said, still reading. William looked at Elizabeth. She kept her eyes on the pot she was stirring. "It means it is over," William said. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Then Clara said, "Good," in the small matter-of-fact way she said things that she considered settled, and went back to her letters. Elizabeth kept stirring. She was not going to cry in front of the children. She was making a considerable effort not to. She heard William push his chair back. She heard him cross the kitchen. She felt him stop behind her, not touching, just close, just present, in the way he had of being present, that she had stopped pretending she did not notice. "It is over," he said again, quietly. "For her." She nodded. She blinked. She kept stirring. He stayed there for a moment, and then he went back to the table, and she got the children's supper on, and the evening moved forward the way evenings moved. In that house noisily, warmly, with Samuel arguing about something, and Clara demonstrating something she had learned, and the sound of ordinary life filling the rooms that had been quiet for too long. It was not a small thing. It was, in fact, the largest thing. The Sunday that changed everything was in October, when the air had turned, and the light was the specific gold of early autumn, and the ride to town felt different than it had in July. William had asked her to come to church with them. He had asked it carefully, without pressure, in the way he asked things that he understood were her choice to make. She had said yes. She had not been back to Harlan Creek since the morning they threw her out of it. She sat in the wagon between the children, Clara pressed against her left side. Samuel a deliberate distance away on her right that he had been incrementally closing since they left the ranch, and she watched the town come into view and felt her pulse do something complicated. "You do not have to look at any of them," Samuel said. She glanced at him. "I know," she said. "But if you want to," he said, "we will be right here." She looked at this boy, 7 years old now, with his father's jaw and his mother's eyes, and something that was entirely his own, something that had been shaped in part by 2 months of being listened to and taken seriously, and told that his word meant something. "Thank you, Samuel," she said. He nodded. He closed the remaining distance and leaned against her arm, just slightly, just enough. They walked into the church together. William first, then Elizabeth, with a child on each side, and people turned to look, because of course they did, because this town had watched her be thrown out of it 4 months ago. And now she was walking back in on the arm of William Dawson's family. And the story of what had happened to Cornelius Holt had been moving through the territory for weeks. She held her head up. She sat in the pew with Clara's hand in hers, and Samuel's shoulder against her arm, and William a steady presence beside her, and she looked straight ahead and breathed. Reverend Gaines spoke about justice. He spoke about it carefully without naming names, the way men of God navigate between truth and community, in small towns where everyone knows everyone, and the balance is always delicate. But he spoke about it clearly enough. He spoke about the obligation of a community to protect the innocent and to make right what had been done wrong. He spoke about the particular courage of people who keep honest records in the face of those who would rather the records not exist. Elizabeth kept her eyes forward. 2 pews ahead of her, she saw a woman who had turned away in the street in July. The woman did not turn around, but she sat very still in a way that said she was aware of exactly where Elizabeth was sitting. It was not an apology. It was not anything she could name. But it was something. It was the acknowledgement of a community that had failed someone and was in the early uncomfortable process of knowing it. She let it be what it was. After the service on the steps of the church, Ruth found her. Ruth looked different than she had when she came to the ranch lighter. Somehow the weight of 20 years of guilty silence redistributed into something she was carrying differently. Her husband Daniel stood slightly behind her with the same careful attention he had shown in the assessor's office. "How are you?" Ruth said. "Better," Elizabeth said. Ruth looked at her for a moment. Then she looked at William standing nearby with the children, and something moved across her face that was old and complicated, and finally at peace with itself. "She would be glad," Ruth said quietly. "Margaret, I want you to know that. She would be so glad." Elizabeth looked at her. "I believe you," she said. Ruth nodded. She squeezed Elizabeth's hand once, brief and firm. Then she and Daniel walked to their wagon, and Elizabeth watched them go, and she thought about a woman she had never met, whose eyes lived in her daughter's face, and she thought, I know she would. On the way home, Clara fell asleep against Elizabeth's arm with the completeness she brought to everything. Samuel stayed awake watching the road with the focused attention of a boy who was thinking about something. After a while he said, "Are you going to be here for Christmas?" William glanced at her across the top of Clara's sleeping head. Elizabeth looked at Samuel. "Yes," she said. "And after," he said. She held his gaze. "And after," she said. Samuel looked at the road. "Good," he said. He said it the same way Clara had said good when William told them about the inquiry. Matter of fact. Settled. The way you say something when you have decided it is true, and do not see any need to make more of it than it is. William was quiet for the rest of the ride home. But when they pulled through the gate of the ranch, and Clara stirred awake, and the children climbed down from the wagon, he stayed beside her for a moment while the children ran ahead. "Elizabeth," he said. She looked at him. He reached into his coat and took out something small and held it out to her. It was a ring, not elaborate, not extravagant. The kind of ring a rancher bought in a frontier town because it was honest and real and not trying to be anything it wasn't. Simple, silver, clean lines. She looked at it in his palm. She looked up at him. "I am not good at speeches," he said. "You know that." "I know," she said. "I am not going to tell you things I cannot back up with action," he said. "You have had enough of people who said things they did not mean." "Yes," she said. "So I will only tell you what I know for certain," he said. "I know that you are the most honest person I have ever met. I know that this ranch is a home because of you, not in spite of everything that happened, but because of you specifically. I know that my children—" His voice shifted just slightly, just enough. "My children needed someone to choose them. And you did. You chose them every single day when you had every reason to leave." She was not going to cry. She was absolutely not going to cry. "And I know," he said, "that I am asking you not because I need someone in this house. I am asking you because I want you in it. You. Not someone. You." The ring was still in his palm. The October air was cool and the light was long, and behind them the house was warm with lamplight, and ahead of them the children were already at the door, Clara turning to look back with those serious, knowing eyes. Elizabeth looked at the ring. She looked at William. She thought about a dirt road in July with nothing but a cloth bag and a broken heart, and a small hand reaching across the space between them. She thought about what she had built since then. Not been given. Not rescued into. Built with her own hands, her own nerve, her own refusal to be discarded quietly. She reached out and took the ring. She put it on her own hand because her hands were steady, and his were not just slightly, just barely, just enough that she noticed and loved him for it. "Yes," she said. He let out a breath, just one, long and slow and deep, like a man who has been braced for something for a long time and has just been told he can stop. She stepped forward, and he put his arms around her, and she stood in the yard of the ranch that had become her home, with her face against his shoulder, and the ring on her finger, and the sound of Clara shouting from the doorway. "Samuel," she said. "Yes, Samuel," and Samuel's voice replying with elaborate composure that he knew obviously he had known for weeks. She laughed. It came out of her full and real, and not caught this time. Not held back. Not careful. Just laughter, honest and unguarded, the laughter of a woman who has finally landed in a place where there is nothing to be careful about. William's arms tightened around her. In the weeks that followed, the ranch settled into the shape it had always been reaching toward. Hector took one look at the ring on Elizabeth's hand the morning after and said absolutely nothing, which was the most eloquent thing he could have done. Pete, the young rider who had carried the records to Billings, shook William's hand and then turned to Elizabeth and shook hers with equal gravity, which she appreciated more than she showed. The children absorbed the change the way children absorb good things completely, without ceremony, as though it had always been coming, and they had simply been waiting for the adults to catch up. Clara stopped asking, "Are you going to leave?" She started saying, "When we do this, and when you teach me that, and when we go to town together," and every when was casual and certain, the language of a child who has stopped bracing for loss. Samuel, for his part, simply moved through the house with the settled confidence of a boy who had decided the important things were decided, and his attention was now required elsewhere. He brought Elizabeth books he had finished. He asked her opinions on things. He argued with her occasionally about things he cared about with the particular engaged energy of someone who is comfortable enough to disagree. She argued back. He loved it. She knew he loved it because his father did the same thing. That same quality of animation, the same focus, the same willingness to hold a position and examine it, and sometimes, when the evidence was sufficient, let it go. She was learning the shape of this family. She was learning that it was also the shape of herself. One evening in November, she was sitting at the kitchen table after supper, working through the ranch accounts. She had taken them over from William 3 weeks in, because his system was held together with optimism and habit, and she had a better one, and he had handed them over with visible relief when Samuel appeared in the doorway. He stood there for a moment, which was unusual. Samuel was not a hoverer. He came in when he had something to do and left when it was done. "What is it?" she said without looking up. "Nothing," he said. She looked up. He was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed in the way he crossed them when he was working up to something he was not sure how to say. "Samuel," she said. He looked at the floor. Then he looked at her. "I don't call you Mama," he said. "I know that." Her pen stopped moving. "I know you are not her," he said. "I know Clara knows too. We know." He paused. "But I wanted you to know that it is not because we do not. Because we—" He stopped. He was 7 years old, and he was trying to say something enormous in the limited vocabulary available to a 7-year-old, and she watched him struggle with it, and did not rescue him because he needed to get there himself. "It is not because we do not love you," he said finally. "It is just because you are you, and you have a name, and it is your name." He lifted his chin slightly. "So we call you Elizabeth, because that is who you are." She set the pen down. She looked at him for a long moment. "Samuel," she said. "Yes. Come here." He came. He walked to the table, and she put her arms around him, and he allowed it fully, completely, his arms coming around her in return, his face against her shoulder, the full surrender of a child who has held himself together with great effort for a very long time and has finally decided he does not have to anymore. She held him. She did not say anything. She just held him. After a while he straightened and stepped back and wiped his face with the back of his hand with enormous dignity. "I am going to bed," he said. "Good night, Samuel," she said. He walked to the doorway, then he stopped. "Elizabeth," he said. "Yes. I am glad Papa found you on that road." She looked at him standing in the doorway. "So am I," she said. He nodded once. He went to bed. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that, with the accounts open in front of her, and the lamp burning, and the sound of the house settling around her, and she thought about a July morning, and a dirt road and a wagon that slowed, and a small hand reaching out across the space between two strangers. She thought about everything she had been given. She thought about everything she had refused to let them take. She thought about Ruth, who was still fighting slowly in the way long-term fights are fought day by day, document by document, the grinding institutional work of making a wrong into a right. She thought about Reverend Marsh with his careful hands and his church safe. She thought about Pete riding hard to Billings with an envelope and a 19-year-old's absolute certainty that no one would stop him. She thought about Hector at the gate, about Clara's nightmares that had stopped, about Samuel's first finished book placed on the table with such grave pride. She thought about William saying, "Not the only reason I am glad you are." She thought about a ring on her hand and a man whose hands had not been entirely steady when he held it out. She closed the accounts. She blew out the lamp. She stood in the dark kitchen for a moment and listened to the sound of her family sleeping. The particular quiet of a house full of people who are safe, who know they are safe, who have stopped listening for threats in the night. Her family. She let herself say it. Not out loud, just in the place inside herself where the truest things lived. Her family. She walked down the hall and checked the children, the way she checked them every night, a hand on the doorframe, a look in the dark, the slow rhythm of their breathing, telling her everything she needed to know. Samuel on his back with his arms crossed, even in sleep, stubborn and certain, even unconscious. Clara curled on her side with one hand under her cheek, her face entirely unguarded in the way it only was when she was asleep, and the work of being Clara could rest for a few hours. She walked to her room. She stopped in the doorway. William was already there, sitting on the edge of the bed with his boots still on, the way he sat when he was tired, but had not quite given himself permission to stop yet. He looked up when she appeared. "Children all right?" he said. "Sleeping," she said. "Both of them." He nodded. She came into the room. She sat beside him on the edge of the bed, and they sat there together for a moment, in the particular quiet of two people who have said everything important and are comfortable in what comes after. "Long day," he said. "Long few months," she said. He looked at her sideways. Something in his face was easy, in a way it had not been when she first sat beside him on a wagon bench in July, the lines less set, the jaw less held the eyes. Without that specific guarded quality she had read in him the first evening, the quality of a man who had stopped expecting good things and was not sure how to start again. He had started again. She had watched him do it. She had been part of why. He reached over and took her hand where it rested on the bed between them. Not dramatically, not with declaration, just took it the way you take hold of something you intend to keep. "I want you to know something," he said. "All right," she said. "That road," he said. "The morning I found you. I had been to 3 different places in town and nobody would tell me where you had gone. Holt's people had made sure of that." He paused. "I rode that road because it was the only road out of Harlan Creek that made sense, and I told myself I was going to town to settle some feed accounts." She looked at him. "You were not going to settle feed accounts," she said. "No," he said. "I was looking for you." He looked at their joined hands. "I just had not decided to admit that to myself yet." She thought about a wagon slowing behind her on a July road. A voice that said "ma'am" without performing it. Two children with two old eyes. She thought about climbing up onto that bench. She thought about the whole impossible chain of things that had led from that moment to this one. The terror and the courage and the records and a Bible and a shotgun in a doorway, and 4 pages of her careful handwriting, and a ring on her finger, and a boy's arms around her shoulders in a kitchen at night. She thought about how easily any single link of it could have broken. She tightened her hand in his. "I am glad you were a bad liar," she said. He made a sound that was unmistakably a laugh. Short and real and unguarded. The laugh of a man who has not done it enough and is remembering how. She felt it move through her like light through a window, warm and clear and full of the particular promise of things that have been dark a long time and are finally open. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He put his arm around her. Outside, the Montana sky was enormous and full of stars, and the land was quiet, and the house was warm, and somewhere in it 2 children slept without nightmares in rooms that had stopped echoing with absence. Elizabeth Carter. Soon to be Elizabeth Dawson. Though she would always keep Carter too, because it was hers, and she had earned it, and no one was taking it, had arrived on this land with nothing but a cloth bag and a broken heart, and 8 months of someone else's dishonesty written in her own careful hand. She had arrived believing she was someone people could throw away. She left that belief on a dirt road in July, somewhere between the town that had discarded her and the wagon that had slowed. What she had built since then was not rescue. It was not charity. It was not someone else's mercy extended to a woman who had none of her own. It was hers, earned, documented, defended, and kept the way she kept everything that mattered with both hands and clear eyes, and the kind of refusal that looks quiet from the outside and is made of iron all the way through. She had walked into this land with nothing. She had made it home. Not because someone gave it to her, because she was the kind of woman who, even with everything taken, still knew exactly what she was worth, and she had simply waited and worked and held on until the world caught up with what she had always known.